Great. Well, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you, Daryl. So real quick, I mean, I know who you are, but people watching this may not. So talk a little bit about yourself. You're an award-winning poet. I know you just won one of your poetry books just won an award recently, right? Talk about that and what kind of poetry you do and all that.
Yeah, I live in Hamilton, halfway between Toronto and Buffalo, and my poetry has been described as 40% Lou Reed style urban reportage and 60% surrealistic jokes.
Surrealistic jokes.
Yeah. Um, it's kind of funny how my life kind of went in a circle where um, uh, surrealist artists that hit me really hard like 25 years ago. Now I'm circling back around and they're inspiring my literary art in a funny way. Well, my first book was really autobiographical because when you start to write, it's natural to use the detritus of your failed personal life as raw material. And then for my next book, the one thing I knew was I didn't want to do that anymore. So I needed a new theme. And so the big theme I found was documenting the changes going on in the city of Hamilton. Um, the city of Hamilton traditionally was like a Baltimore or a Pittsburgh. Uh, we used to have 10,000, like tens of thousands of men employed making steel, and now that's all gone. And now we're transitioning to whatever comes next. And uh, it turns out what's happening here is, of course, not unique. It's happening in other places. So that's a potent theme in my books now. And the other thing was an idea from the surrealists in the 1920s, which was called the poem as an event, where um, this sounds kind of inside baseball, but Auguste Rodin did a sculpture of the novelist Honoré de Balzac. And when you see it, there's one part of the sculpture that looks finished, and one part that looks about a week from being finished. One part over here looks about 3 weeks from being finished. And so in 1890, they'd look at this and say, well, this is just crap. But actually, what he was doing was before the invention of motion pictures, he was trying to document and save different moments of time in one static image. So the literary surrealists like Mallarmé and Apollinaire had this idea about the poem being a document of its own creation.
Yeah.
So I start a poem with a beginning that appeals to me, and I don't know where it's going. Um, I Some writers have the ending in place when they start, and for me, if I could do that, why bother writing it? I could just think about it. Be pointless, right?
Right.
And so for me, writing the poem is like, hey, I'm juggling. Will I be able to keep juggling across the finish line in time? And my idea is that if I'm surprised, there's a better chance the reader will be surprised. And also with that poem as event idea, then you have a poem that hopefully has some novelty value to keep the reader's interest up. And also, it's not just about X, it's also a document of its own creation. And as such is also whatever the cover story is to get you in the door, it's also a celebration of being alive.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Hello.
like that.
Hi.
Very cool.
How's it going?
Hey, Nick, welcome. I was just having Daryl talk to me a little bit about his poetry and how he approaches it and everything. So, Nick, now I don't know if you're a poet, but I do know you're a songwriter.
Yeah. So not so much a poet, but yeah, songwriting's my thing. So yeah, got some lyrics, and
Yeah.
you just kind of write what you feel. You kind of write stories that kind of reflect what you're feeling at the time. I usually start writing a guitar riffs is usually how I start most pieces. and then I just capture some emotions and feelings that go with it, and then a random phrase or two comes out, and then it just kind of evolves from there. And sometimes it takes a few days, and sometimes it takes many years. So
Wow.
I've got songs that are on the back burner years, like 12 years ago still, that I've yet to finish.
So yeah, so I've written songs, and I've been both. I think I can relate to both Daryl and you, because I did poetry for years, in my creative writing days, and then fiction as well. And then, but I was in a band and I wrote lyrics, and I would write the lyrics first, and then I would just wait for the musician in the band to write some music that I thought, oh, that'll work with that, But the lyrics came first, or I would give them the lyrics and they would write music to the lyrics. But then I've also written more like what you're saying, where like the guitar player would have music already finished, basically, and would just start playing it over and over and over again, and I would start sort of feeling something and writing something I thought fit with that music. And so then the words came out of the feeling created by the music. So I kind of used to kind of doing a little of both. And I think both are fun. I like doing both. I think when you start with music and you write lyrics, it feels more to me like stream of consciousness. I'm just sort of grabbing feelings and putting them into words. And I like doing that. There's a freedom to that. But as a writer, I also love just having an idea for a line or a lyric or an image. And like, I got to get a pen and write that down because that was awesome. And then either I keep writing that or I just hold on to it. And later on, I pull it out and go, oh, this what I wrote over here goes with this other thing I wrote over there. Let me just put these things together and, create something out of it like that. So I've done it a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
And it sounds like Daryl, do you always write poetry the same way you were saying, where you start with an idea but you don't know where it's going and you kind of surprise yourself at the end?
When I was younger, I would have ideas spontaneously pop into my head, just like a clever line or an idea, right? But now that I'm rapidly aging, it takes a lot more work, and things like that don't happen. So I actually have to write notes to myself. So actually, I'll have I'll write down some lines and go, that kind of pleased me. I don't know what to do with it. Put it on the shelf, and then I might be, oh wow, here's a couple lines that would be a good ending. Keep that in the drawer. So it's actually happened to me where I was writing a poem and I was stuck. And I went through these old notebooks and I had a note I had written to myself in 2006. And it said, Dear Daryl, when you're in trouble, try this.
Wow.
And so I said, yeah, I'm trying to be spontaneous and have these loose associations that are surprising but still work. And sometimes it's like a Frankenstein monster, like putting these like patchwork random organs together, kind of. But it kind of depends. When you were talking about songwriting, it reminded me one time I was reading this interview with Steven Tyler from Aerosmith, and it was when Aerosmith was really dysfunctional and not working. And they said, oh, you haven't written any songs lately. And then Steven Tyler said, that's because I'm not Patti Smith writing poetry here. My job is to write words around the music. And if the music's not coming, the words aren't coming. That's my job.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's his role, right? And it's kind of funny. When my first book came out, I thought, okay, great. Now I'll just sit in my hammock and collect the royalty checks. And it turns out it doesn't really work that way anymore. And to sell a book, you have to do readings. And so I've done dozens and dozens of readings. And doing all those readings made me a better writer because they were a real powerful reminder that poetry is meant to be processed by the ear. And why is it that a song you hate is easier to remember than a newspaper article?
Yeah.
There's a good reason for it. It's because of rhythm and meter, right? And why is it that whenever Moses or David or Jesus say something that is really important and they don't want you to forget it, they switch to poetry?
Right.
Why is a third of the Bible written in poetry? There's a reason. you know. And Gerald Manley Hopkins and W.H. Auden, they both agreed that before you tell me the meaning of life and show me how smart you are, the job one is to be pleasing to the ear. So doing all these readings and having that experience, it kind of made me less interested in formal things like couplets and quatrains and verses, and more just having fun with sounds.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's funny. You know how people think poetry is supposed to rhyme? Um, I think that is a scam invented by the French.
The French?
The French. And I'll tell you why. Because in French, if you say all the days of my life, how many words are there in French that rhyme with V? There's 7,000.
Right.
Okay. But in English, you got wife, knife, strife, and then you're out of luck,
Yeah.
right? So in
Right.
English, if you think, oh, I've got a rhyme, sometimes you choose the less than best word because you're trying to force the rhyme. And in English poetry 1,000 years ago, they would do acrostic poems where the first line is the first letter of the alphabet, the second line is the,
Yeah, the Bible
or
does that. The Bible does that too.
absolutely. In fact, I think Micah does that big time. Um, it's so brutal to translate the Bible because they do all these tricks that like don't translate.
Right.
Like in English, we think puns are the lamest form of humor, but the minor prophets loved them,
Right.
right? They couldn't get enough, right?
Yes.
Um,
Yeah,
so
and
a
you know
lot of
what? Yeah, you know what? Not to interrupt you, but
people,
like Wendy and I are reading David Bentley Hart's translation of the New Testament, which we're really
right?
loving, and he has notes at the bottom where he'll say that in the Greek, this is a play on words, and Paul is having fun with how this word sounds like that word, and so he's like pointing out to you, like if you spoke Greek, you would get there's kind of a joke here,
Yep.
but you can't you will always miss it because there's no way to recreate that in English.
Yeah, there really isn't. And translation is always a heartbreaker. You can never do it right. It's just brutal.
Yeah.
There's so much we miss, and uh, especially with the Hebrew, there's bits in the Psalms that like you put to memory where in Hebrew there's a couplet that in English to do it justice, it'd be like eight lines. For example, in Hebrew, if I say to you, I know what you want, okay, that is one three-syllable word
Wow.
in Hebrew. And that one syllable word also tells me the gender of you, okay?
Yep.
So the Hebrew has such density that like if you try to like translate it, you're gonna lose the poetry or the meaning. Um, uh, each language, it's funny when a person tries to translate Dante's Inferno into English, they'll say, "What the hell happened? Where did half of it go?" Because you know how it starts saying, I, I got lost in the dark woods," right? In Italian, it's Silvana Oscura, and in English, it's dark woods, and it's all like that. So if you translate it properly, the English version is like 60% shorter. Um,
Yeah.
the strength of the English language is its vocabulary is insane. When a person learns English, they say, "Do you really mean to tell me English has 12 words for blue?" You can say indigo, azure, uh, aquamarine, turquoise, teal, sky. 12
Navy.
words for red,
Yeah.
carmine, scarlet, on and on and on. Right? And in
Crimson.
Hebrew, it's the opposite. Their thing is they have a very limited vocabulary where a word will do double duty, and you know what the word means by how it's used in this line,
Yeah, the context.
great of these other meanings. So like spirit, wind are the same word.
Yep.
Um, so that's all part of the fun. Like I remember one time W.H. Auden, who's the champ, right? He said, if you want to write poetry because you've got something really important to tell the world, please don't bother. Just skip it. But if you want to write poetry because you're in love with the language and you love words and love putting them together and it's fun, come on in.
Yeah.
And so the joke is he had plenty to say,
Yes, he did.
but he said, no, you have to do this in the right priority. And certainly writing poetry to increase my love of language. I'm biased, obviously, because this is my racket, but I think by a happy accident, the antenna you need to develop to appreciate poetry, never mind write it, are also the antenna you need to develop to become a good citizen.
Mm.
Both projects require you to be to work at being grateful and to pay attention to your surroundings.
Yeah, absolutely. That's, yeah, very true. Well, hey, I love this stuff. I could do this all night, but we should probably read some poetry and some song lyrics. So who wants to go first?
Um,
You or Nick?
Go ahead.
I'll,
Go ahead,
I'll-
Daryl. Go ahead,
Read
Daryl.
one. We'll each do one. So let's go around. So Daryl, you can start us off.
okay, so we'll each do one.
Well, no, what I'm thinking is we'll each read one now, and then we'll talk, and then we'll go back and read. We'll each read one more. If you have more than one.
Sure. This is the first poem from my next book, and my next book is called Mechanical Monkeys. And it's called that because it's concerned with the way technology is warping all of our relationships and neighborhoods and social structures out of shape. And the book asks the question, what do you do when the replica, the digital simulation becomes more persuasive than the real deal? What do you do?
That, by the way, that's very Philip K. Dick of you.
I think it is. It's kind of funny. I'm talking in my book about gentrification, the way I've watched with my own eyes peach orchards turn into donut diners, right? And it's like, it's hard to write about that without being corny, but
Right.
but it is happening, right? Now, I remember the very first video game in the world. It was called Pong, and my uncle got it, and it was like a black screen with white things and a ball.
Yeah, me too. I had it. Yeah, I had
Right.
Pong.
And I remember looking at that, it was like sick and going, that's not that good enough to lure me away from my comic books. It's not
Right.
that, right?
Right.
But now I'm told they have really, really good video games that are way more convincing,
Oh,
right? Okay. So that's all done, right? You know, in 1860, Joseph Conrad was 20 and he wanted to change his life. So what did he do? He changed his name, went to the waterfront, and went away to sea, right? Now, when a 20-year-old wants the same sort of dopamine rush from adventure, he stays in his mom's basement and plays Call of Duty,
yeah. Yep.
right?
Yep.
Also, I don't mean to get too X-rated here for you, but if you get involved in a relationship with a lady, that involves a risk.
Yep.
There's a good chance if you do that, it will hurt. You might get a financial loss. It might make you cry. It's a risk. So now there's this digital simulation for that kind of stuff,
Right.
where gentlemen go, oh, this isn't great, but it's less risky, right?
Right.
So the two big things that would define a man, you know, taking the risk of a relationship and going to sea looking for adventure, now they have this simulation, right?
Yep.
So the gag is, Jesus said, most important thing is love your neighbor. But thanks to these improvements in technology, my neighbor never goes outside. So even if I wanted to love my neighbor, I can't get to him.
Right.
It's impossible.
Yep.
So this is a poem from Mechanical Monkeys, and it's called Love is Magic. We suffered from a lack of common reference points. I mean, her mother was a witch. My mother sold cosmetics to her friends, carved sandwiches into perfect tiny triangles. No one wanted to burn her at the stake, but who wouldn't love a witch in the house, especially if Hollywood's been telling us the truth? Failing grades, mysteriously born again as A pluses, club feet and sour milk for everyone who looks at you funny. The chest swelling pride that comes with the secret knowledge. Maybe when you get to the end, you start fresh with a new baton, new maps, new paintings on the walls of the Motel 6. Or maybe just an inkling, a Powerball ticket, and the sound of your own echo as you sing your way out of the Hall of Mirrors. Hello, walls. I wish you were a door. Watch me now. I've been practicing.
Wow. That is so great, Daryl. I really do love your poetry, man. And I
Well,
think,
very kind, thank you.
and I love, I think the way I first discovered you, and it's very bizarre. I don't even know how, but somehow I found you on YouTube, and you've got some short clips of yourself reading. Some of them you're actually standing on the sidewalk with traffic behind you and stuff, and you're reading your poetry. And dude, I think I told you the first time I messaged you, I was like, you should always only do poetry like that, like street poetry or like out, you know, in your city. Uh, like it just feels like it resonates more. And certainly coming from your voice, like you said, I think hearing you read the poetry, hearing it in your voice adds so much power to it. It really is like the whole thing. Like I love, well, now that I know your voice and I've heard you read some of them live or like on video, when I read the ones like in print, I'm hearing your voice as I'm reading it. Like I can't not hear your voice, which I
Okay,
think is
that's
it
good.
adds so much to it.
Hmm. You know, there was one time I met a person who read my book blind and assumed I was a real depressed, angry, seething with rage kind of guy. And then they met me in person and heard me read them. And then when I read them, they're like, "Oh, it's okay to laugh. This is
Yes.
great." Um, so yeah, um,
Yeah, there's a whimsical sort of there is a little bit, there's a whimsical tone to the way you read, but there is still also a little bit of an undercurrent of sadness or cynicism, but it's not overwhelming. You know what I mean? It's kind of there, but it doesn't overtake the whole thing.
you know, there's always these different colors on your palette, and you kind of have to be careful. Um, I remember when I was writing my last book, um, I was writing a poem and I used a fancy word, and I think it might have been incrementally or parallelogram or something like that. And I thought that's the right word, but I did make a note to myself, or actually told myself, okay, you can't use another fancy word for 7 pages
Right,
because if you just want to show off, show it to your mom, right?
right.
Like you know how your mom likes everything you do,
Of course.
so she's your mom. But if you really want a stranger to give his valuable time to getting in your head, you've got to give him something, right? Like it's not just about showing off; it's about communication,
Yeah.
and that's really thrilling. So, like I said, when I didn't just want to write poems about my relationships, my broken heart, I thought the cliche when you in like creative writing 101 is the more specific you go, the more universal you go.
Yep.
And like for me, the top of the mountain is Anton Chekhov, and you may not be a cobbler in Siberia, but when you read his stuff, you're right there because it's about loss, time you can't get back, all these things that are so universal. And it turns out there are interesting things going on in my city, and what I just had this experience where I would be writing a poem that was, trippy and abstract, but then if I would put in an intersection or refer to the statue downtown, that basically was a hook that people could get in. So it's funny. Last year I did a lot of writers' workshops, and people would give me their poems or stories, ask me to critique them. And one thing I always said was, these amateurs, it would seem like they felt that they had to cram the meaning of life into every poem. Like, you've got time, relax, right? And all of their writing, if you read it, you would have no idea that they had a body, right? They could be a head in a jar floating in a fog or something. So I'd say every page, give me some bit of sensory data.
Yep.
And olfactory memories are very vivid in human beings. So if you have a page of writing that you think is flat, you'd be amazed how much you can pump it up full of life by including a stink.
Yeah, a smell. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a bit in my last book where I refer to Hamilton as smelling like a mix between smelting ore and tandoori.
Mm.
And anyone who reads my book, they always comment on that and they say that I really nailed it, right? And so, it's the old cliche, you want to be a writer when you're young and full of energy because you want to change the world, you've got all these ideas to say. But a little bit of that goes a long way.
Yeah.
And well-placed bits of sensory data is the stranger's way in.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. That is true. I mean, it is one of those rules of writing where those specific details mean everything. Like I had my creative writing teacher in college was a novelist. He wrote a novel called Sympathy for the Devil, Kent Anderson. It's a great book, and he's a great writer. But I'm telling you, out of the entire book, there's one description he uses that I'll never forget it. He talks about how it's like the main character is in Vietnam, and he was in Vietnam, so he was writing about his real experiences. He wasn't making it up. He really had been to Vietnam. So he talked about how he woke up one morning and he said the sky was the color of an old bruise. And I just thought, damn, that's a great image. I will never get that out of my head. I will always remember that description, that the sky was the color of an old bruise. Oh, dude, great. Those are the kind of little bits like, I mean, the book is great, but if all I had was that one sentence, I'd be happy. There's beauty, just genius in that, simplicity.
I've had a few moments of that in my life where it changed my life and set me on this road. Like I remember the book The Long Goodbye by Raymond Chandler is a big deal to me, and I reread it every time.
Chandler, yeah, he's great.
So I first read it when I was a teenager, I suppose, whatever. So basically, the guy, the narrator, who was so poetic and depressed and likable and all that stuff, he meets this guy and it's love at first sight, and he falls in love with the guy right away. And then throughout the course of the novel, finds out that the guy he loves is actually not a really good guy. And then there's a bit when he says, I felt as cold and empty as the spaces between the stars. I'm like, man, someday I want to do something like that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
I want to have a line that moves people like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
all right, so yeah, sorry, I'm going to come back around but I want to give Nick a chance to read something as well, and then we'll come back around.
Yeah, thanks. So this is a song called "The End of Silence." I released it under a band I have called Relevant Discord, and there's a couple recorded versions out. There's a remix version and a kind of a raw kind of rough guitar track and drums and things like that. It's pretty simple, but it was just I wrote it probably started it like 15 years ago, but new versions of it came out again earlier, almost a year ago, on a little album called Rediscovery. But it's called "The End of Silence." So, and it's always kind of weird to read it because I'm used to singing it. So,
right.
But so it's why do you feel alone and empty-handed? I felt the pain you hide, and how it makes you weak. Don't think that I have grown blind. My eyes are on you. Forget your defenses. I'll be the strength you need. In the chorus line. As you draw the lines, as you see the signs, is there anything left to rescue? As you close your eyes, as you realize, is there anything to? And then it kind of folds off there.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you feel so cold and abandoned? I've known the doubts you hold and the desperate thoughts you think. Know that you're not alone. I am here beside you. So forget substitution. I can be your place of peace. In the chorus line, as you draw the lines, as you see the signs, is there anything left to rescue? As you close your eyes, as you realize, is there anything to hold on to? I promise I'll be there for you. I promise I'll be there for you. I promise I'll be there. As you draw the lines, as you see the signs, is there anything left to rescue? As you close your eyes, as you realize, I can be your one to hold on to. As you rise and fall, as you see it all, understand that I am here for you. I believe in you. I believe in you. I just need you to believe in me. I just need you to believe in me. I promise I'll be there for you. I promise I'll be there for you.
So, that's interesting, man. Right there at the end, too, and I don't know if you intended this, it's almost like, because the first part of the song, I feel like it might be someone talking to God. And then it sort of feels like, well, no, maybe this is God talking to me. And at the end, it's interesting because it almost feels like it's switching between, like it could be either one or both. So I don't know if that's, if I'm catching on that, if the voices are changing or not. But it's interesting to think of those lines, one direction if it was God talking to me, and another direction if it was me talking to God or someone else.
Yeah. And when I write lyrics, I have a few things in mind, but then I kind of like to frame them and kind of leave. It's like paint. It's like building a house, but letting someone else decorate it.
Yeah.
So I like to kind of give you a framework, but not always come clean and say specifically about this or that.
Right.
Because I like people to really insert their own meanings and stories into it. So,
yeah.
But a lot of people have come up with that as and I can see that relationship, the nerve going back and forth.
Yeah, and that's what makes it interesting to me. This is like, I know I'm different because like when it comes to movies or even like TV series or things like that, like I kind of prefer stories where they don't tell me what it is and they trust me to take the information to figure it out, or at least come up with something that I think makes sense. Like I'm intrigued by that, but I don't want you to tell me that it is that or it's not that. I want to be able to, like, for example, there's a movie by David Lynch called Mulholland Drive, and that movie is a beautiful puzzle. And even though I think I've got it figured out, I think I do know what it means. It took me several viewings to figure it out. But even my explanation for what the movie means, the seams aren't perfect. You know what I mean? There's a couple of things that don't line up perfectly, but I'm okay. Like, that's fine. It's life. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to fit perfectly. But there is still something there to piece out and to just to find meaning in the different layers of it, right? And so I like what you're saying. Like I like what you're saying in the sense of like, well, the other thing I thought of was, you know who Seal is? He was a big deal in the 90s. No one.
Oh, I love it. Love Seal. I was actually just learning how to, reminding myself how to play Kiss from a Rose on guitar today.
Yes. So if you notice so I saw an interview with Seal, and if you notice, none of his albums have lyrics, none of them. And he talked about why, and he said that he had so many people that would come up to him after a show with tears in their eyes and say, "Oh man, I love that song where you say blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And it means so much to me, da da da." And they would walk away, and he'd be like, "I don't have a song that has that line in it."
Yeah.
But that's what they heard, and they needed to hear it, and then they brought meaning to that art in a way that if I had tried, I could never have written something that meant as much to them as what they think I did, right? So there's that thing about art, whether it's a painting or a poem or a song or whatever, where the observer brings meaning to it that could be completely different from what the artist intended.
Absolutely.
And that's valuable. Like, so in other words, art is a conversation. It's not just, I'm the artist, here's what I want to say, and by the way, here's what I mean completely. To me, that's the most, if that's art, that's the most boring art ever created. To me, art is, I'm an artist, I'm creative, I have something inspiring me to do what I'm about to do, but I'm not, you know, I'm gonna leave it open so that it's interpreted and by the viewer or the listener or the reader or the hearer in such a way that the meaning then is provided sort of by the participant, right? And to me, that's art. That's when those things connect, you know? So I'm interested in creating art that allows that to happen. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, good stuff. Yeah.
All right, so I'm gonna read, I'm gonna do both here. So we're each gonna do, I think, at least two. If we have time, we'll do another one. But since
And I'm gonna grab a cable charger here. Yeah, my battery's getting a little low. I'm just gonna grab a charger. So I'm in earshot. I'm just gonna plug you in. So.
Okay, good. So anyway, I'm gonna read one of my lyrics, and then later on I'll read a poem. And I think maybe I'll start off with the lyrics since he just read some lyrics. Trying to see which one I should read. Oh, well, okay, I'll read this one. So this is I was in this band called Elysian Skies, and years ago, and a bunch of friends of mine recorded these songs. And what we tried to do was, like, for me, I wanted to like take what I thought were my best lyrics I'd ever written and just like put them all into one album. So these were some of the lyrics at the time I felt like were the best I had ever done. And I'm going back and forth on which one I'm going to read. Maybe I'll read this one. Okay, maybe I'll read this one. This is Blood of Innocence. And I put a little quote from St. Francis of Assisi ahead of it. This isn't in the song, but I just put it ahead of the lyric. It is in giving that we receive. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned. It is in dying that we are born again to eternal life. So here's the lyric. The song is Blood of Innocence. A dishonest man brought me into the fold, and an unfaithful girl brought me in from the cold. It rains on the unjust and righteous as well. The sound of the truth is louder than hell. A forgetful Samaritan passes away. His friends and his family have nothing to say. The children of poverty ask for a drink. I'm lost in my thoughts, so I don't stop to think. Shaken alive by the blood of the innocent, I've got the answers if nobody questions it. Hands of compassion, destined for nails, light in the grave after tearing the veil. We pray in the evening to comfort our fears and wake before daybreak so no one can hear. The code of our silence must not be betrayed in spite of the thousands still in their chains. So.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I miss writing lyrics. I used to love doing that, man. But again, I would write lyrics for, like, I wrote that lyric completely before I knew any music at all, right? I was more about writing lyrics that communicated something interesting, right? And I was on purpose, like, trying to find ways to communicate things in uncommon ways, especially with Christian music, where, like, you know, every chorus has to say, and Jesus died on the cross for your sins, and he's coming again, and blah, blah, blah. Like,
Fine here.
like, I want to dump all of that crap, and can I still talk about hope and redemption and forgiveness without using all those cliches, right? Which is really, really hard to do. So anyway, so Daryl, you got one for us?
You know, it's so funny. You said so many things now that just make me want to add to. I'm kind of overwhelmed.
Sorry. Well, you can reflect if you want.
Yeah. We can reflect. What was the last thing you just said a second ago? Oh yeah. It's so funny. Christian art. How do you make Christian art in the 21st century in the Western Hemisphere and not be corny? It's a real problem. And actually, I was just talking today. There's a painter from Canada named William Kurelek. It's kind of hard to summarize, but he was obsessed with using his gift as a way to evangelize the world. And he was kind of a nut or whatever. So he had to deal with this problem. So one of the greatest Canadian paintings is just down the road from me at McMaster University. And it's a crucifixion scene he did set in a Manitoba wheat field. And he was just saying, as soon as you sort of think that the crucifixion happens where people wear sandals and robes, it's a way to distance yourself from it.
Right.
And he did a series of nativity scenes that took place in different parts of Canada. He did a nativity scene that took place in an Inuit village, in a Ukrainian village, in a Jamaican village in Toronto. Really doing this hard work about how do you be a Christian and not be corny, right?
Yeah.
And in modern times, I think Shusaku Endo, the Japanese novelist, did a good job of that. Like he wrote the book Silence.
Oh gosh, yes. Oh my gosh, yes. And the movie's great too. It's great.
Yeah, but he wrote a few other books that I like just as much, and it was really interesting. Being like, how do I be? He'd have other books where, if you read them, your spider sense is tingling, saying, "You, this guy's on the Christian side of the street, but he's so Japanese, he can't give you like a Jack Chick tract and like
No.
give you right? So it's a really interesting question. And what you were saying before, Anton Chekhov was under huge pressure because people saw him and said, "Hey, buddy, you have this huge gift. You should use your talent to preach and tell the people who they should vote for, how they should organize the service, what they should do." And just like Jesus, when they tried to crown him, he ran, right?
Right.
And Tolstoy couldn't stop hectoring and preaching and sermonizing, telling you, "Oh, brother, the world would be so much better if I was in charge. Listen to my plan." And Anton Chekhov said, "My job is not to give you the right answers, but to give you the right questions."
Yes.
Very much so.
All right, can I stop you for a second? You see this poster over my shoulder?
Yeah.
I stole this poster from my college art department, and it's actually a crappy poster for some fiber class that you could take about fibers and things like textiles. But I stole it because of the message. You can't read it, but the message on that poster is, sometimes well-formed questions are more useful than well-formed answers. And I read that line and I was like, damn, that's good. We need better questions. We need people that are better at asking the right questions. It's much more difficult to ask good questions. And Christianity has been so much about giving answers to questions no one asked yet.
Yeah.
Well, also, that's because North America is allergic to humility.
Yeah.
Where if I said, if you said, "Oh, what do you think we should do about Syria?" or something, I can't say, "I don't know," because I would die of shame.
Right.
I've got to pretend I'm an expert on Syria,
Yes.
right? And that's a real modern affectation that everyone's an expert, so no one can be humble.
Right.
But of course, if you can't be humble, you're not in touch with it. But the important thing was, I think if you make something that says, "Here's this thing I wrote," it tells you who to vote for, what you should do. I think that is not art. I think that is something called propaganda.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's propaganda.
And in my opinion, art and propaganda are polar opposites.
Yes.
And great art, to be a tragedy, you can't answer the question. It's like, I remember I recently watched Othello. And when you watch Othello, you keep on thinking to yourself, why, right? You watch it and you're going, why is Iago such a jerk? Why? Why? And they never tell you, there's no secret origin, right?
No.
It's just there, right? And then you watch it and you're like, why the H does Othello believe Iago instead of Desdemona? Doesn't make any sense. And the reason Shakespeare's a genius is he doesn't tell you. He
Right.
says, yeah, it's a mess. Welcome to life. Good luck.
Hmm.
Right? It's
Yep.
like you watch Godfather, and he spends the whole time saying, I don't want to turn to my dad. I don't want to turn to my dad. And then suddenly he turns into his dad, right? And like, what? What happened? You just said you didn't want to turn to your dad. Well, welcome to life on planet
Yes.
Earth.
Guess that every son has ever said, has always said that, and then you do it. Right.
It's like when you're young, you define yourself by saying, I don't want to be like dad. And then one day you look in the mirror and say, good Lord,
Yep.
what happened to me? I turned to my dad.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I
So,
mean, like honestly, like for me, this is why I hate Christian movies, because I love movies, and Christian movies are the worst because they're propaganda. There's no mystery. There's no art in it, and that's why to me, my favorite Christian movies are not produced by Christians and not distributed by Christians, and most Christians would hate them. You know, like Gran Torino with Clint Eastwood. I think is a great Christian movie, and there's f bombs and there's violence and there's yes, but it's a beautiful film about redemption. I love Andrei Tarkovsky's movies, and he actually produced these films. You know, they were bankrolled by the Soviet Union, was an atheistic government, and he couldn't make movies about faith, but yet he did. He found creative ways to make movies that on the surface look like they're about science fiction,
yeah,
or look like they're about memory and growing up and nostalgia, but they're not. Every one of them, beneath it is about, it's saying something about faith in a creative way because he couldn't. He wasn't supposed to, but he was determined that he was. And that's what makes it beautiful and powerful. Like Tree of Life is another one. I love Tree of Life. I think that is a beautiful film about faith, but no, churches aren't going to screen that film, you know?
yeah, it's kind of funny. Like now, the problem is in the 21st century, when you say Christian art, people think of Thomas Kincaid
Ugh,
or Kirk Cameron, right?
yeah.
But
The
it is
painter
kind
of
of funny
trite. Yeah.
how Christians of all people having an inferiority complex when actually you should be boastful because check out this. Um, the greatest painters who ever lived, the greatest novelists who ever lived, the greatest musicians who ever lived, the greatest poets who ever lived, we're all Christians. Okay? Um, Milton, Rembrandt, Tolstoy, Isaac Newton. That's not a bad starting lineup,
Yeah.
right? So what's going on here, right? It's a really weird in inferiority complex. And like the best art is Christian art. And up until really recently, um, for a novel to be complete, it had to involve, if not redemption, at least a journey or a bit more self-awareness or something. And uh, and I remember watching a movie which starred what's his name, Daniel Craig, James Bond, and it's a movie called Enduring Love that was written by Ian McEwan, who's a really smart guy who's an atheist, and basically Daniel Craig, who would later be James Bond, gets a stalker, and it's about this guy who falls in love with him and is stalking him and won't leave him alone. And I had such an oppressive feeling watching this movie because it just seemed like the atheist worldview taken to its logical conclusion. We had people who had all these material blessings, but were still so bitchy and agitated and restless.
Yeah.
And their world was so hermetically sealed, there was nothing outside it.
Yeah.
Um, and it's funny, it's like, you know, the movie, The Exorcist is kind of a funny story where the writer of The Exorcist, William Peter Blatty, he was a very devout Christian.
Yeah.
And when he wrote the book, they said, "Oh wow, you've written a great horror novel." And he said, "I wrote a horror novel because he actually wrote the novel to be like an evangelical tract. We thought if I convince them that
There's a
evil
devil.
exists, they will have to run screaming in the other direction, right? Um, also, to make great art, you have to convince me that something is at stake
Right. Yes.
Okay.
And you can, and the solution cannot be obvious before I even start. And if I watch a Christian movie, if the guy is drinking or he has a drug problem or he's tempted to cheat on his wife or he lost his job or whatever the struggle is, I know in advance what the answer is going to be. At some point, he's going to pray the prayer, get on his knees, cry, and then he's going to become a Christian, and then ding, everything's going to work out great for him. I know that before I watch it. So why? It's boring. And then when it happens, I'm like, yep. Although I also know in reality that never actually happens to anybody. It's not reality, it's a fantasy, right?
Yeah. And then that's the bait and switch of Christianity. That's why people leave. Or like, I certainly remember praying the magic prayer, and then afterwards, I'm like, wow, I still had to have the same bad habits that I wasn't miraculously delivered from. What a. Um, so like, don't write checks you can't cash like that, right?
Yeah.
Also, um, it's funny, we have a movie about, oh wow, our marriage was on the rocks, but I prayed, and now everything's great. It's
Yeah.
like, um, that's tough.
Well, you know what though, I wanted to say, because you were talking about the atheist, who did this movie with Daniel Craig, and it was,
Yeah.
but you know what, it made me think of another atheist who wrote a book that the book became a movie, which I would consider also a very great movie about faith, is Carl Sagan. Carl Sagan wrote a book called Contact. It became a
Right.
movie. That whole movie is about a scientist who experiences something amazing and then can't communicate it to everybody else. They don't believe it happened. And it's like, it's such a parallel to what it is to be a Christian, to say, I've experienced God. I'm trying to convince everybody else that it's real. And everybody says, oh, you're crazy. And it's like, well, then, but so you have to have faith. You would have to have faith to accept that this incredible thing was real, right? But it's impossible to describe it in a way that anybody who hasn't had the experience could believe it, right? And yet this is Carl Sagan who did this. And it's really interesting because I think what comes across with Carl Sagan, I know this because one of his friends who was a Christian, after he died, he said that Carl and I had many conversations about God, many conversations about faith, and it's not that Carl didn't believe, it's that Carl didn't want to believe, he wanted to know. So there was still within him a desire and a drive. He was looking, he was searching for God, but as a scientist, it wasn't enough for him to believe. He wanted to know, he wanted it proven. But of course, that's why it's called faith. You'll never come to a place that you will know. You will always come to the cliff and have to step off and trust, in faith, because knowledge will never get you there, right?
Yeah, it's a good movie. Really enjoyed that one.
Yeah, yeah.
Good. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I should check it out. So Daryl, do you have a poem?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Uh, this is a poem dedicated to Mr. William Sherman, who in 1912, he founded the Dominion Foundry and Castings Company, also known as DeFasco, where I used to work, and they used to employ 17,000 people. Now they make more steel by employing 2,000 people due to robots. So this is a poem called Requiem for Steel. Dreamed of Crazy Eights back at the tin mill. Dreamed we still had a tin mill. But now it's cheaper to roll slabs in Brazil or almost anywhere but here. Head office is in Luxembourg or Mumbai. It's called amalgamation, the planetary consolidation of steel. My hand still hurts from Comic-Con. The cosplay parade slowed down traffic. I was in a mood, punched in my hazard lights, and started picking fights with masked Avengers, obese Klingons. Lucky if I don't get sued. And my real anger wasn't for them. It was for our blind technocrats herding us off the stage to join the Neanderthals, leaving all our strivings as a legacy for unborn cyborgs. Coal dust from the mines, just diamonds under pressure, like retraining for customer service. or hunting for scrap metal and copper because the pension fund's insolvent. Natural gas fires carve out a memorial tattoo. The arc light's prism still calls to us like the song of the sirens.
Oh, wow. I know I've told you this before, but you remind me a lot, and I don't mean this in a bad way. I don't mean derivative, but I mean there's a tone and a feeling to your poetry that's reminds me of Richard Hugo.
Okay,
Do you know who that is?
vaguely. I
I'll
think you'd have
send
to.
you, I'll send you one of his poems.
Okay, great.
It's actually good that you don't know who he is because then that means that it's not intentional.
Actually, I don't know who he is.
Yeah, that's good. And maybe I shouldn't send it to you, but
Oh,
no, but what I love is like, again, we talked about details. Right? I love the obese Klingons.
actually, one story that I really love to tell. Um, there was one time I was doing a poetry reading in Cardiff, Wales, and Wales is really nice. Wales is a lot better than England,
Oh yeah,
and they made me the headliner of a festival they were having. And basically, when you're in Wales, if you talk the way I do, they automatically think you're a celebrity, and they just love hearing me talk, right? Um, so I got up to this podium and I looked at my stash, and I'm like, wow, all my poems are about Hamilton. So this is kind of inside baseball. So just bear with me. And then I started reading poems like the one I just read. And at the end of it, the people in the crowd were crying. And they said that the same thing had happened there, where Gordon Brown had found a way to circumvent the tariffs, to wipe out the manufacturing sector in Wales. So from Cardiff to Swansea, you can just drive all day and see mile after mile of padlocked factories. And you have a whole generation of men with nothing to do, right?
yep,
So these people in Wales said, wow, you're telling our story. And then in November, I read that poem to some people at a library in Dunkirk, New York, which is near Erie, Pennsylvania. And a woman in the crowd said she had retired from Syracuse. She started telling what happened when Bethlehem Steel shut down in Syracuse. So I've had this experience of, like when you meet someone, you talk about the weather, you talk about nonsense, and here, through the power of art, I go up to a stranger, and in a second, we're talking about the most important things in our lives,
yeah,
which is just a real testimony to art's power to transcend all this nonsense and get right to it.
yeah.
So that was a real thrill, and you know, just like just say, dig deep, be specific, and then that's when it will actually resonate.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't know if you want to say or not, but the details, the specific details in your poems, they feel real. Like if you're making these up and inventing them, damn, that's really good because they all feel like you actually did and experienced every single thing that I'm reading.
It's kind of funny. Sometimes people read my books and they say, "Wow, you must have had a really, really rough life, right?" And it's kind of funny because I a lot of my stuff where people say that I'm basically taking like a really rough month I had in 1998 and just ripping it,
I had a rough month once. Yeah.
yeah, to like milk the drama, right? And now I've had the experience of people reading my free books and then meeting me and then being disappointed because I'm too normal,
Yeah.
right?
You know.
Where I met a woman who read my book, and then when she met me, she was kind of she assumed I'd be shaking with rage, and I'm like, no, it's okay. That's just
That was the outlet. It became the outlet. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, but look, I mean, it's the same thing. People think they know you because they read your book or whatever, and they think they But again, they know a part of you, and they know how you feel about this particular idea or thought. But yeah, they don't. I mean, and in some ways that's a good thing. People feel connected to you because you put into words something they always thought and felt, but they didn't have words for it, right? And that's good. I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful to know that. Um,
Well, it's funny. Like different people. Like I remember uh, both Lou Reed and David Bowie saying they'd be really irritated where they would run into fans in the street, and the fan would be disappointed that they were too normal. And it's like, dude, we had this time 35 years ago when we were out of our heads and all wild, and now we grew up, right?
right,
But they meet some fan who thinks they're still like in a gutter with a needle in their arm. I'm
right,
like, oh, that was a season. What's the matter with you? You know, I have a real life to live. You know,
Yeah.
there's even ways to. One of the mysteries. Here's a big mystery. You could read every word William Shakespeare wrote. It's close to 1 million words, and you can learn so much about what it's like to be alive, what it's like to be a human being, but you will learn nothing about William Shakespeare.
right,
He's he's not in there.
right,
And if you ask a young person why you want to write a book, they'd say, "Oh, I want to express my inner feelings and all this." Shakespeare would have said, "What the hell's the matter with you? That's crazy." You look, Shakespeare, like you write as well as you can for money to get paid, right?
right.
So, do you know how people say Shakespeare couldn't have written those plays, right? And there's a society of people who say it was some Duke of Earl who wrote them.
Oh yeah, there's a whole mystery about, and there's movies even, documentaries and things about it. Yeah.
Like, that's actually my pet peeve. I hate those people. I really hate all those people because first off, they're motivated by snobbery.
Right.
There are people who had middle class upbringings and got a degree, and the idea that a guy could penetrate that deep into the human experience and be a rough, uneducated guy from the sticks,
Right.
that doesn't compute for them.
Right. It goes against the narrative. Yeah. The
Yeah.
assumption. Yeah.
Also, these people think they have this idea that the artist has to die in the saddle. Like Beethoven and Rembrandt both dropped dead at the workstation in the middle of making art. And the joke is with Shakespeare. This sounds funny. Um, Shakespeare's last play, he writes The Tempest, and The Tempest is the play where Shakespeare lets you know that he knows just how good he is. Okay, starts off deposed king, plans his revenge for 30 years. You're like, oh, it's a tragedy. And then when he's about to deliver the revenge, as the rules and convention dictate, he says, actually, I choose Christian forgiveness instead. Let's have a wedding.
Right.
This is how a comedy is, right?
Right.
And as revolutionary as Chekhov's plays were 3 centuries later, breaking the rules. This is a tragedy or a comedy. It's got all been spilled. What are you doing? Right? And after he writes The Tempest, he stops writing because he'd made enough money to be able to buy a rental property. So he quit writing, went back home to his hometown, and devoted himself to drinking full time, and died with his head on the barroom floor at the age of 53.
Wow.
Okay?
Yeah.
So people hear that and they say, Shakespeare, he quits to become a landlord and that doesn't compute. I'm like, well, again, welcome to life.
Right.
Also, it's funny, you know how people say, oh, if Shakespeare wrote this, how could he have knowledge about the inner workings of the politics of Padua or Venice or jibber jabber? Only an earl could have that knowledge. And actually, it's funny, if an earl wrote the plays, how could he have written the tavern scene? And actually, in Shakespeare, there are tons of bits where you know that they were written by an actor. And actually, he started as an actor. And this is kind of a sad story. Shakespeare, he knocked up this girl who was really not very attractive. And then the girl's dad's like, you have to marry my daughter. And then Shakespeare says, I was hammered. I didn't remember her. Come on. It's like, no, it's a shotgun wedding. You've got to marry her, right? So he did. And then he had a son named Hamlet. And then Hammett died when he was 10.
Hmm.
And then that's when Shakespeare said, okay, I'm out of here, forget it. So then he wanted a career that involved him being away a lot. So I went to London to be an actor and then said, these scripts are crap, like I can do better than this. So there's a bit in Macbeth where this porter comes out and tells some jokes. I'm like, what's the point of that? And the point is that gives the other actor time to get backstage and wash off the blood so he's ready for the next.
The next scene.
So there's all these actor bits that like tell you, yeah, stuff like that.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
also, on the other end of the spectrum, Steve Ditko, who created Spider-Man, from 1965 until 2015, he refused to be interviewed.
Yeah, I know.
And he said, my work is me. Don't ask me anything. It's all there on the page.
Right. Everything you want to know about me is right there.
It's all there,
Yeah.
right?
I love that you're a comic book fan too. You've been sharing a lot of Kirby and stuff like that, and Mobius, and I know you and I share a lot of those that love of that stuff. That's cool. Hey, I just want to real quick. You and I could talk for another hour, but I want Nick to read another lyric.
Cool. Yeah, I'll read this, and I hate to run. I'm gonna have to run in just a second to. I'll read one more song real quick. So,
Yeah, okay.
but thank you so much. It's been fun doing this. So,
Yeah, this was a
uh,
blast. We should do it again.
yeah, this one's called "Forward Thinking." It's a kind of a current single that I've got out under that Relevant Discord band name. So wrote this one probably 12 plus years ago as well. So it's hello regret. What is it you want to say? The saddest stories of all your fading yesterdays. Please don't try to deter me from becoming which. Let me start. Please don't try to deter me from becoming more than what you can see. Please don't label abandoned hope as the wisdom of uncertainty. You and I tend to view things through opposing lenses. Sights we see are deemed beautiful or merely worthless. Left unchecked, you're a detriment to all I stand for. Simply said, I don't fit your mold of forward thinking. Dear apathy, have you something new to sell? Beyond blurred vision and excuses that you feed yourself. Please don't invite me to buy into your vagrant sense of adversity. Please don't forget this sweet sound of sedition that I'm offering. You and I are indelible in thought and action. Exploits speak what is focus or just inhibition. Still, your words are disposable when paired with reason. Simply said, I won't be your voice of forward thinking. Forward thinking, please stop speaking is kind of a bridge line there. And then, please forgive me if I've overstepped my boundaries. I'm sorry that things did not seem to work out for you. But I've seen, I've felt, and I must become something. I won't be what you settled for with forward thinking. Now, please don't take this the wrong way, but could you keep silent? All you speak is a currency so long devalued. For if I fail, at least I can say I tried to matter. I won't be the new product of your forward thinking.
Very cool.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's one of the current songs on an album we got out called The Traverse under that Relevant Discord band name. So,
Yeah.
but it's one I've had out for years and years and years. So, yeah.
Do you use the word indelible there? Did I hear that?
I did, yeah. Chorus 2 uses, you and I are indelible in thought and action is the line. So
I love, see, I know Daryl was talking about like using a fancy word, but I think it's actually in a song lyric. If you can pull it off, it's actually really good. Like I had a friend who wrote a song and he used the word inscrutable.
Yeah.
And I said, dude, way to go. I can't believe you wrote a song and used the word inscrutable, but I mean, it was the right word. It wasn't just like, we just throw this crap in there, right? It was like when that word shows up in the song, there's like almost a light on it. And it's like, oh, damn, that was great. Like when you can do that, when you like really is like choosing the right word at the right time. I mean, it adds so much to it. I mean, I love that. So that was good, man. I like that.
Actually, I think saying your words are a devalued currency is pretty darn strong.
Yeah.
Yeah. We also did on this latest release, we did a remixes. So we did like the rock single, then we did remixes. So, and for the remix, I actually went back in the studio months after we'd actually tracked original vocals. And we did kind of, because we took a piece from the bridge that was a guitar part that really didn't sync up with the standard vocals. So So my engineer said, hey, go back. I want you to just sing bits and pieces and praise, pick out a few lines. And we closed the whole song with kind of a Nine Inch Nails-y kind of piano outro type of thing, where it just says, your currency is so long devalued, your currency is so long devalued, just as a total redo on it. So
That's cool.
Yeah.
Interesting.
so that,
Yeah, that's a great line, man. Yeah.
yeah, cool. If you have one more, Keith, I can stick around to hear one more real
All right.
quick, but I do have to
Yeah,
run. So
I'll do one more. So now this is me reading a poem. And I'll give you guys gave us a little backstory. I'll give you some backstory real quick. So when Wendy and I, my wife Wendy and I were dating in college, she had a stalker. So there was a guy who was she was a waitress at a restaurant here in El Paso, and he was the cook. And he was kind of messed up. He was one of these guys where he would sit in front of her house and get a notepad and write and fill the entire notepad with this letter to her and leave her like 24 roses and buy her jewelry. They'd never been on a date ever. Like, he just over the top, right? He was a classic stalker guy. And Wendy and I were engaged, and I didn't know how to react to this guy. I actually did confront him. I found out where he lived. I went to his apartment. I tried to basically back him off. It didn't really help. But he was kind of terrorizing Wendy, and so it was just a really horrible time. But I wrote a poem to him. So this is a poem. It's called To Luke Crow. That was his name, Luke Crow. So to Luke Crow. As the serpent is lifted up in the wilderness, so is my anger lifted up against you. If my desire to end your life were a flame, oh, how I would burn, supernova under a blue sky, with a Bible in my hand and a thorn in my side. I am torn. I am torn between lusting for the warmth of your blood on my hands and longing to see you covered in the blood of the Lamb. And I hope one day to find you sleeping and to raise my sword above your head, to cut a lock of your hair and leave it beside you as you dream. You are not the king you hope to be, and my songs can never soothe the demon in you or me.
it's intense, man.
That was a pretty intense, yeah. But
Yeah.
that is exactly how I felt. It's like I
Yeah.
wanted to kill that guy, but I also wanted him to I
Yeah.
wanted him to be healed, right? I could see how broken he was. And I couldn't do either one. I couldn't kill him unless I want to go to jail, and I couldn't heal him. So I could just stand there between these two places, right?
You don't go Old Testament without getting thrown in jail.
Right. And you can see, I kind of went the whole Old Testament on
Yeah. There were the different references. Yeah.
David with the sword, but cutting a lock of his hair and leaving it beside him instead of,
Oh, nice. Yeah.
I could have killed you, but I didn't,
That's a good one, yeah.
And then me wrestling with if my sword was over your head and you were dreaming, would I do that? I don't know what I would do, right? So yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing. I hate to bail out a little bit early, but I do have to run here. But thank
I
you
know
so
it's
much
late for you, yeah.
opportunity here. So I really appreciate it. And it's been fun visiting with you, Keith and Daryl. And I don't know if I think that was all we had in the chat, but yeah, thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah,
I look forward to doing something else again sometime soon. So
yeah, maybe we'll try to make it a semi-regular time of poetry night. We'll just have different poets come and read poetry. I mean, I think we could definitely fill the time.
oh, yeah.
No problem there.
Yeah. Well, thank you again. And I'll let you two keep having fun with it. So
All right, thanks, Nick.
all right. Have a good night.
All right, man, God bless.
I know how to turn this on. Might take me a minute to figure this out. As I fumble through this. This is going to take a minute. Just talk amongst yourselves.
All right.
I'll give you time.
Oh, there you go. He got it.
Okay, great.
Well, cool. I'm okay to talk a little more if you want to.
Okay, great. Where were we? How about I'll read a poem.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, now this is a poem about a guy who ripped me off in a crystal meth deal in 1998.
Okay.
And it turns out that still really bothers me. So if you see him, it's called Fragmentation Grenade.
All right.
Gave Gerald the $40. but he never gave me the 2 caps he promised. Just old jokes and crackpot theories about gravity springs and leprechauns, subcutaneous microchips, and falling angels. I'd still prefer the 2 caps. I want hard results. An explosion in slow motion reducing me down to a gaggle of singing shrapnel. So much for summer's hydrocodone. Lick the bag, make a wish. A ghost is always stuck in that moment before the paint dries, that hour before the luggage clears customs. Squeaky cloud cogs, sci-fi Lego sky, bramble and thistle sabotaging the construction site, stuttering pirate parrot, the courtroom drama's shocking twist, the beat cop just looking to make the quota. How close we come to mystery with only algorithm standing between being human or a Burger King beef cow. Moo.
Oh my gosh, man. That, I think that may be my favorite poem I've ever heard from you.
Right on.
There were so many great lines in there. The thing about the paint drying, the moment before the paint dries, about the ghost. Damn,
Yeah.
that was good. And then there was a line right after that one. What was that?
Okay. Yeah, I'm glad you like it. Like I said, I'm trying with every book I do now to make it harder. Where, yeah, and anyhow, okay. So much for summer's hydrocodone. Lick the bag, make a wish. A ghost is always stuck in that moment before the paint dries, that hour before the luggage clears customs.
That's it.
Squeaky cloud cogs, sci-fi Lego sky.
Oh yeah. And the sci-fi Lego sky, dude, that's another great. Damn, they were like right there. That whole thing that you got like 4 killer images there. Like if I had a poem that had one of those in it, I would feel like I had done something. And you have like one stanza that's got like they're just packed in there. Damn, that was awesome.
Well, yeah, I keep on trying to raise the game. Like, when you start writing, you're like, wow, my mom likes my stuff. That's great. And then you want to improve. You're like, I'm the best writer on my street.
Of course.
And then you keep on, and now that I've won an award, I've done, blah, blah, blah. Oftentimes I'll write stuff and I'm like, great, that was good enough back in the day, but now that's not good enough, right? And I want my books to be really precise with all the fat boiled off.
Yeah.
And like my poems don't rhyme, but one thing I really love now is metonymy.
Yeah, the rhythm.
And
Yeah.
I think that's a real cool thing. Like, for example, if I say to you, Wall Street really had a bad day today, okay? I'm not referring to the short street by the Hudson River called Wall Street,
Right.
right? I'm referring to the American economy as a whole,
Right.
right? That's a metonym. And so in my book, I want to talk about the way technology is blah, 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 blah. But the problem is no one likes hearing sermons. It doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
So instead of me doing that, if I have a poem that is well crafted and is interesting, and it features guest appearance by the Terminator T-800 or whatnot, as I said before, at the very least, it has some novelty value because it doesn't sound like any other poetry book on the shelf.
Right.
And also, in a slippery way, it gets under people's skin and makes them think that, oh yeah, that's a good point. We are swimming in the solution of advertising slogans, pop culture detritus, whether we want to be or not. What do we do about that?
Yeah.
And so if instead of me preaching about technology is bad, if instead of a poem where I say, oh, I woke up and my lover had turned into a robot,
Yeah.
right? That works a lot better.
Yeah.
So it turns out in my new book, there's actually a lot of references to Lego because I'm talking about one, what is the world made out of? And also I'm saying, what do you do when the cheap made in China replica is more fun than the real deal,
Right.
right? And apparently the way to get that in under the radar is to talk about Lego. Like I went for a walk in my neighborhood and, oh, this building and this sky, it's Lego. It wasn't Lego last time I looked, now it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Very cool. So, yeah, man, you and I have a lot of um, connective tissue, I would say. Like, I think there's so many, that's what I like about like some of the references you drop, and even like how the things, like I said, you share things on Facebook, where I see we like some of the same movies, some of the same comic artists, and kind of pop culture stuff. I think that's really cool. And I appreciate that you bring all that into your craft.
Yeah. Um,
So have you read much of Philip K. Dick?
you know, it's funny. I've read pretty much everything. Um, and one thing that's funny, now that I'm old and weathered, is you get to see how your taste change over time. And there are things I was obsessed with when I was a teenager, and I still am, and they're really locked in. Like, for example, uh, people think I'm trying to sound arty farty when I say this, but a big influence on my poetry is Rene Magritte. Now, Salvador Dali gets all the attention because he had such craft and skill, but I think Rene Magritte was actually much smarter and gives me more to think about.
With
So
more
he was
idea.
all about, what if you take like not some phantasmagorian nightmare? What if you take normal everyday objects, but just put them in weird places? Or what if instead of a bowler hat, this average guy had a toaster on his head,
Right.
right? And the idea is by recontextualizing everyday objects, it makes them seem kind of frightening, odd, and makes you take a close look at them. Like, wow. It's like, you know how there's stairs in my house that I climb several times a day. But if you say to me, how many stairs are there? I'm like, I have no idea, right?
Right.
But the Surrealist project was to make you pay attention to things like that. So um, it's kind of funny when I was trying to progress in my literary project. Mary said, I can't paint, but I want to have that effect that Rene Magritte had on me when I was 18,
Right.
right? And also when I was 18, I was obsessed with Joseph Conrad, Graham Greene, and Raymond Chandler. And all those guys um, had a way of using the physical environment surrounding you as a way to mirror or echo your internal mental state.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
And now here I am all these years later, and those are still my go-to guys.
Yeah.
And when I went to university in the early 90s, I read 24 Philip K. Dick novels. And they blew my mind as they do. And now today, where I'm at, I can't read them.
Right.
And what I like in art, what I look for, it's not really there.
Yeah.
Like there is a funny writer in this named John Cheever, who who was a great American writer, who his critical assessment was really way off base. He wrote these stories set in the suburbs, Long Island, commuters, and people thought he was a straight. He was really misunderstood. But his stories had this internal fairy tale cracked logic, like Borges or Italo Calvino or J.G. Ballard or something. And he's a guy who's really good at compressing a lot of meaning into a lot of into a tiny space. And as I grow older, that's what I really respond to.
Yeah.
And now, as I age, my love for Anton Chekhov grows and grows. And when you first read Anton Chekhov, your first reaction is like, what the hell? There's nothing here. Why was Daryl telling me this guy's so great? There's nothing here. Right? It's just a bunch of stuff that happened.
Right.
But then you have to acclimatize yourself to his world and get it. And also, Anton Chekhov has no quotable quotes. You know how like a lot of great words like Tolstoy have quotes on Goodreads, whatever. He doesn't, right? He has no crazy images with time machines, no meaning of life aphorisms. It's just this happened, then it's over, right? Um, he has a play where the doctor is fiddling with his mustache. He's talking to the housekeeper about, what do you think about my mustache? And for 100 years, actors were like, how do you play that? And some play it like he's bored, just saying something to kill time, or he's clowning, or he's talking down, right? And actually what it's about that moment when you look in the mirror and say, good Lord, I turned to my dad. I have hair coming out of my ears. What happened? I used to look cool. Now I'm an old guy, right? So not only is Chekhov not about plot, it's not about character, it's about that sensation of inexorably feeling yourself drifting forward on the river of time and going, oh, wow, there's something oh, it's gone.
Yeah.
And that's something that really knocks me out. And and like the Philip K. Dick stuff, for me, it's kind of like a Kiss concert where where there's all these pyrotechnics and fireworks, right? And if I went to see Kiss, it would be awesome, but so what,
Right.
right?
Right.
One time I saw this interview with, I think it was David Cronenberg,
Oh yeah.
where he was talking about Philip K. Dick, and he said Philip K. Dick's ideas were great, but because of the circumstances that he was writing in, with his problems with amphetamines and being crushed by poverty,
Yes.
he didn't have time to be fancy. So his writing style is pretty brutal.
It
So
is
one
pretty
time David Cronenberg said, reading Philip K. Dick is like trying to enjoy a well-cooked meal in a restaurant that smells bad.
Oh, I love it. Oh, that's
Because
great. No, I think
there
that's
are Philip K. Dick
interesting.
books like The Zapgun or The Penultimate Truth, where this memory of like, oh wow, there was a giant telepathic worm that was broadcasting to the people and making them think the president was alive when really the president was just a hologram, right? And I remember that bit. I'm like, yeah, right on. But if you go to actually read the book, you're like, good Lord, you know, get to the good part with the telepathic centipede.
Right. Well, no, like I agree with you. Look, I agree with you. If you want to approach Philip K. Dick as a writer, I would say there's one exception. I agree with everything you just said because like it's more about the ideas. He has fantastic ideas, and I do think if you're going to read like his ideas books, like the books that have the sort of the coolest ideas. I don't know if you've read Ubik. I love Ubik because Ubik is one of the books where, and it's one of the few books I've ever read by anybody that does this. Every single chapter, when you get to the end of the chapter, I mean, at least I did, I'm like, what the hell? Because he just did something completely out of the clear blue. And then I read the next chapter and then he does it again. And it's like every chapter, it's almost like he's going out of his way to like, well, what thing can I do next that'll bend your brain? And so as an idea book, to me, that's the best, like so many ideas packed into one single book where it's just one thing after the other. And I think actually the ending of the book, no spoilers, but the ending of the book, he adds one final and it's too many. One final at the very end, he can't resist the temptation to do one last little twist. And it actually shouldn't be there. Like if I was his editor, I would say, no, don't do that. You didn't need to do that. But he has one book, and I think it was one of the books that was published after he died. It's the most un-Philip K. Dick book he ever wrote. It's The Transmigration of Timothy Archer.
Yeah, that's a good book.
And because that book, it's not a science fiction. It's in the first person. None of his books are in the first person except this one. So it's all first person, and it's a female protagonist. He never did that. All of
Yeah.
his books, it's always a guy. It's always a man. It's basically Phil in every book. Because he's always got a wife, he's divorcing, and she, she's overbearing, and he's trying to get out of the relationship, and he has no willpower. Like, that's every character in every Philip K. Dick novel,
Okay.
except for that one. And it's weird that it's the most Philip K. Dick book. And I think it's one of the best. That book is one of his best written books. Like, one of the few I think I've ever read by him where, like, I'm reading it and going, damn, this is well written. He's paying attention to emotion, to setting, to temperature, to feeling, to smells, and like that he never did in any other book. I don't know why that one is so different, but that book is almost like, I can almost believe actually that Phil didn't write that book. Like, it almost feels like maybe one of his wives or his daughter wrote that and he put his name on it, because like it feels like, it does not feel like him at all. It's so different.
Well, it's funny what you said about Ubik having one plot twist too many, right? And it's true. Like, Ubik is a great book, and it's a great horror novel because the protagonist is in danger of literal disintegration,
Yes.
and the enemy is non-being.
Yes.
And there's a bit where he's like crawling up the stairs as he's being disintegrated, and it's scary stuff. Right?
Yeah.
Like, everyone's scared of not existing. But yeah, he had novels where he knew this one got away from me.
Yes.
Right? Like in 1954, he wrote 6 novels in 1 year.
Yes.
And then he wrote A Scanner Darkly in 1977. And at that point, he was doing a little less speed. And A Scanner Darkly, I think, is a solid book.
Yeah.
And that book really works. And that's a great one.
Yeah.
One thing you really have to give Philip K. Dick credit for is that before him and a few of his friends, science fiction had this pristine look and this all-American naivete to it.
Yeah.
And Philip K. Dick in the 1950s, when Eisenhower was a president and Leave to Be was on TV, he wrote future stories in which poverty and unhappy marriages still existed. And he was the only one, because
Right.
any future you saw, whether it was the Jetsons or Star Trek or whoever,
Yep.
in that future, there was no poverty and there were no unhappy marriages.
Right.
But in his fiction, it's like, yeah, I'm on Mars, but my wife and I are still not getting along, and I still don't have a lot of options, and I still can't change my socioeconomic strata.
Right. So yeah, he actually, yes, that you're right about that. So I think Philip K. Dick actually was the first guy, or at least one of the main guys, to write science fiction stories where, we achieve some great technological thing, but we're still human beings and we still have the same problems and we've not solved anything and nothing's different. Like, it's still the same problem. Bureaucracy is still, in the middle of everything. Marriages are still breaking apart. People are still power hungry and selfish and petty. And yeah, it's like he really did write against the grain of that, super optimistic, like you said, Star Trek, Jetsons kind of
So I
sci-fi.
think now that we've had a good century of science fiction, it is neat to look back and see what we got wrong. And this sounds kind of funny, but in an old country like England, their national mythology looks back to the mythic past, which is the Lady in the Lake and Avalon, Camelot, and King Arthur. Okay, then you have America, and America didn't have a past, so their uniting mythology was based on stories about the future. So basically, like a taser, which is a real thing, it's actually an acronym for Thomas A. Swift's automatic electric rifle.
Wow. Yes.
Okay, so at the start of the 20th century, you had Tom Swift, where the idea was, we're Americans. Someday we'll take over Mexico and Canada. We got the Philippines. We got Puerto Rico. Someday we will do to the Martians what we did to the Seminoles.
Yeah.
Okay, it's going to be awesome. Trust me. Right.
Right.
So in the teens, 20s, and 30s, you had this science fiction where it's like you go to Mars, you wipe them out, you plant the American flag.
Yep.
Just like, you know, how Andrew Jackson made the Seminoles march from Florida to Oklahoma, right?
Yep.
And that was the idea. It was kind of a metaphor for the unbridled optimism of America, right? And like Americans went to the moon, Canadians didn't because the Canadians like, oh, I'm bashful. Maybe we should double check. And America's like, hell yeah, let's do it now. Pedal to the metal, right?
Maybe we should
Human
double
nature
check.
different temperaments, and it's no mystery, right? So the American science fiction, it had this exuberant optimism to it, right? And that dominated for a good half century. And the turning point, and this is really thrilling, was Michael Moorcock at a magazine called New World, where he was an avant-garde guy, and he says, what if I take these moribund cliches and recontextualize them to actually not prognosticate about the future, but to satirize the present.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's funny. People say, "What do you think about Philip K. Dick, Russell C. Clark?" I'm like, "Why aren't you reading J.G. Ballard?" Because
Right.
first off, he was a great writer. Plus, all of his prophecies came true.
Right.
Okay, it's like every one of his books from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s is about, oh wow, it turned out the end game, whatever the Jetsons promised us in the 50s with the flying cars. Now we know the end game of technology is to estrange us from our neighbors.
Right.
Okay, checkmate. Look around.
Yep.
Okay, J.G. Ballard was right about everything.
Yes.
Okay, so J.G. Ballard and Michael Moorcock write science fiction, and their science fiction is not optimistic because they live in England, and England sucks. Okay, I saw this interview with Pete Townshend, and they said, "Hey, you wrote I Hope I Die Before You Get Old. Now you're 7, you're still singing that, ha ha ha." And then Pete Townshend said, "You don't get it. Pete Townshend's earliest memories are playing in rubble, and his mother screaming, saying, that's a shell casing. Run, stay away." And he's a kid trying to play, and he was cutting himself on leftover shrapnel. Okay, so
Yeah.
like, I had a nice childhood, right? Pete Townshend grew up in the remnants of a war zone and rubble, right? So he said when he wrote that song, he never thought he'd get old.
Right.
He never thought it would happen
Right.
because his earliest formative memories were playing in actual rubble.
Right.
Okay,
Well,
so
but see, isn't that sort of the what we were saying earlier about how the artist intends one thing, but the participant, the hearer, imports meaning that may not be there.
oh yeah, definitely. Um, it's always yeah. That's why the problem is when people get into hero worship, right? Because they experience some art or philosophy that affects them, and then they find out that the guy behind the curtain is a disappointment or whatever. And like,
It's
well,
just
yeah,
not.
but guess what, Slick? While he's making the art, he's also living a life. And he also, it's like after Rembrandt's wife died, there were some colors, literally, that he never used again, right? Because like he's not just a prancing monkey for your enjoyment. He's also a human being, right?
Right.
And so Pete Townshend saying, "Hope what I be before I get old." For him, it wasn't a rock anthem thing. It was a joke.
Yeah.
So then J.G. Ballard and Michael Moorcock get a hold of these science fiction cliches and put new life into them. And basically talk about, yeah, what will the future be like? And in novel after novel, J.G. Ballard imagined a future world where uh, people filled the emptiness in their hearts by endless shopping, right? he has a book called Cocaine Nights, which is about that, where it's about wealthy people who live in a resort where they have everything they want, and they start murdering people just to end the boredom.
Right.
So book after book, J.G. Ballard was right on the money, and he has a great book called Concrete Island, which is barely 100 pages. And in England, they have these crazy roundabouts that are really complicated. And this commuter crashes and winds up in the interstices between one of these roundabouts and can't get out. So all these cars are going by him at 100 miles an hour, and they can't stop. So he's trapped between these lanes of traffic, and it becomes like a Robinson Crusoe.
That's great.
Except instead of being on an island, he's got 12 square feet of asphalt on this overpass.
It's awesome.
And it's just brilliant. And it will just, it's like jaw-droppingly right on target.
Now, what book is that?
Dude, it's called Concrete Island. It's barely 100 pages, and it's a good intro to his whole thing.
Yeah. I think I read a collection of some of his short stories. And I forgot why. Well, I think I had read, I'm sure it's something I was reading about writers at the time, probably through Philip K. Dick. Ballard's name came up. And it might have been something like Dick in an interview mentioning something about Ballard. So,
yeah. I'm sure that they admired each other. And J.G. Ballard was a masterful short story writer, and there were tons of them that are really well crafted. And again, he grew up in a Japanese internment camp because his parents lived in Shanghai.
Wow.
So, yeah. So it's funny. Again, when he was 8, like what were you doing when you were 8, right? When he was 8, he was seeing like corpses piled up in pyramids, right? So then for the rest of his life, people would say, "Oh wow, look at that! That's shocking." It's like, "Oh, that's shocking."
Right. He's not trying to be shocking. He's telling you what he's seen. Yeah.
Right. But like if you see piles of corpses and you see torture when you're 8, it takes a lot to shock you later.
Right.
So a big idea in his books is what was called the death of effect, where what happens when you have a population that has been so entertained by the Saw movies or gory torture movies, whatever. How can they really connect to their fellow man if that's what they do for entertainment, right?
Yeah.
And what does that lead to, right?
Right.
You know the Steven Spielberg movie Empire of the Sun?
Yes.
That's J.G. Ballard.
Yeah, that's his life, right? That was a real story.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool.
So it's kind of funny. J.G. Ballard started writing in the late 50s, and he was kind of like a writer's writer. And then when he wrote Empire of the Sun, it was a huge bestseller, sold millions because it's a story of a kid. But if you read the book, it's totally a J.G. Ballard novel. It's not a sellout or whatever. The like writing is lapidary, vivid, unique.
Yeah.
But yeah, very strange guy, and he was right. Also about the Philip K. Dick thing. That's one thing I always noticed in his books, that maybe we're on Mars, but we still have, like I said, class issues, poverty,
Yes.
and William Gibson.
Oh gosh, yes. Love it.
He's from Vancouver, and it's kind of funny. When he first wrote Neuromancer, he didn't even own a computer.
Right.
He didn't read science fiction. The only science fiction he read was William S. Burroughs, and he just made it all up. And then he published Neuromancer, and said, "Oh wow, you're a prophet. You're right on the money." He's like, "I am. This is a good racket, right?" So it's kept it going, right? And one thing he said that you should always remember when people talk about, "Oh wow, the future," right? William Gibson said, "The future is already here.
Yes.
It's not evenly distributed."
Yes, I love that quote. Yes.
Okay, so think about it.
And actually, as much as I love Neuromancer, and I really do, I think that is a genius book. I really think I enjoy some of his later books even more because kind of what he did, he didn't, like, he's still writing science fiction, but it's like 10 seconds into the future. Like, it's basically saying
Absolutely.
we're already in the future, right? And those, like the novels, was it Icaro? I can't think of the titles now. But yeah, so he did a trilogy with Neuromancer, but he did a second trilogy after that. Idoru, it was Idoru, something light, a different light or something like that. Distant light, something. I can't remember the titles now. But anyway, those were more interesting to me because the setting was kind of now, but there was still all this amazing technology and all this. But I'm like, dude, this is science fiction. If you'd have told me when I was 8 years old that I would have a piece of glass in my pocket, that I would basically touch it and I could, and this one device can do like 40 things that will blow your mind, right? It can make videos, it can take pictures, I can communicate with people in Japan or China, I can play games, I can calculate things, I can ask it a question, it'll answer me. Like, I would say, I will never live in that future. That's ridiculous, right? But now I am living in that future, but it kind of snuck up on us to the point where it's like we don't act like it's that unusual.
Well, see, your cell phone is $1 trillion of computing power by 1970 standards.
Yeah, there's more computing power in this than what they used to send the man to the moon.
Oh yeah, that is literally true. When they went to the moon, they had nerds with slide rules.
Yes, literally.
Literally.
Yes.
So it's funny. You know how Arthur C. Clarke, who was actually a pretty darn good writer,
Yeah.
he'd have novels like, "Aha, look, yeah, I predicted this kind of jet propulsion engine, and now it's come through." Right? You could get away with that back in the day,
Right.
but now it doesn't work. Now things change too quickly, like you're saying. So it's like you can't be that kind of science fiction writer.
No.
So the thing is, in my books, that's actually kind of what I'm trying to do. But all I have to do is like drop a hint. Where if I have a line where I'm like, my friends were robots in disguise, and then just lay it in there and like keep on motoring, people get that base and kind of tough, right? So instead of saying, oh yeah, like who's gonna want to read, like, look where we are in 2020. You would tell me that, like, oh, in 2040 we'll be on the moon, on like Mars or something. No, we'll still be here in this line. Like, I've been hearing that line my whole life, right?
Right.
So instead of with Idoru, a book about a Japanese celebrity who just only is a hologram, right? That's a lot more on the money and a lot more valuable.
Right. And by the way, that ended up happening. There really was a hologram Japanese pop star.
Also, I'm not gonna, but you know how we said the future already here, it's just not even being distributed, right?
Yes.
You know that the army had the internet in 1970, right?
Right.
Right. Decades before the average Joe heard about it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So that leads to the question: what does the army have tonight that I won't hear about until 20 years from now?
Right.
Okay.
So along those lines, my dad made a really interesting observation once. When you go to an air show and they have the stealth bomber there, or the SR, or the Blackbird or whatever, and you can climb up a ladder and look in the cockpit, take pictures next to it. You know why? You know what that's telling you? That is mothballed. It's so ancient that the government doesn't care if everybody sees it and touches it and takes pictures of it. What you need to think about is, what's the thing that they've got that they will never show you?
Absolutely.
And if the SR-71 Blackbird was made in the freaking like 50s or something, and Amazing. It could fly out to space and it could fly at 3 times the speed of sound, and like, yeah, and that's ancient technology.
And also, do you know how they've had concerts where they've had holograms of dead celebrities?
Oh yeah, yep.
Where they had one in England where they had the hologram of Ronnie James Dio performing, and then in the States they had Tupac Shakur in a holographic form performing. Yeah. And people sit there and like go, yay, cool, that's really wild, right? And I'm thinking, do you not think there's someone in the world who's smarter than me who can think of a malevolent military application for that technology?
Well, here's the thing. If that technology is something that you and I can play with and do just a concert, yeah, that means that our government has had that technology for a long time, and they have found ways to leverage it. And now it's become so ubiquitous. They're like, we'll just sell it to people. They can use it. Like it's a cast. It's like shavings off the, the workbench. Like, yeah, the stuff you think is so cool because you can't see what's on the workbench. There's something up there that they're messing with now that will blow your mind. But here you go. We don't care. These are some leftovers you can mess around with.
Sure, totally. The things China has with facial recognition software, they actually have. I just saw this video of an airport where they were screening you, where they would ask you a question like, "Do you have to? Does your luggage weigh more than 70 pounds?" And then they had this program built in to ask you like a wacky question in between there for just a split second, where the idea is if you were a terrorist, this question will make you sweat, right? And like throw you off, right? Just like how, if I'm lying, I'm more likely to look up in this direction.
Right.
Right. So now we have programs like that that are so sophisticated. In practical terms, it's basically like mind reading.
Yes.
So what if like your government can access your bank account and can read your mind?
And they can do both. Yeah, you should be concerned about that. Yes, exactly.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, man. Oh yeah. What was I? Oh, Don, someone was gonna say, and I just lost it.
Oh man.
I'm getting old. But talking about like technology, how far it was something like that about some technology that was mind blowing. I read this in a science fiction novel, golly, 10 years ago. And I know it was based on real science, like the science fiction writer that wrote it, he saw it somewhere, in some research or some magazine he was reading. And he thought, oh, this is really cool. And he put it into the science fiction novel. And it's always stuck in my head like, damn, you know what? I'll promise you our government has this technology because it's based on real science. So in the story, there's a character that has this device, okay? And here's what it does. The human brain there's two ways, the vision, right? So human vision, there's two parts of the brain that process vision, and they're not combined, they're separate. So one part of the brain tracks stationary objects, and the other part of the brain tracks things that are in motion. And there are certain frequencies that they've played with that will target the part of the brain that processes things in motion, and basically using feedback turn it off. So what that means is the part of your brain that sees stationary objects is unaffected. If anything is stationary, you can see it. But if I flip this switch, it basically turns off the part of your brain that tracks anything in motion. And that means if I've got a device that's sending out that signal, as long as I keep moving, I can be standing in the room with you. I'm invisible to you. You can't see me. If I stand still, all of a sudden the other part of your brain can see me. But if I move, now I'm invisible again. That is freaking brain science. And they've already done experiments where it works. And I'm reading this in the novel. I'm going, dude, somebody has that. We got to have that technology right now.
Wow.
It effectively makes you invisible. As long as I'm in motion, you can't see me. Holy crap. That is the coolest. I mean, it's the coolest thing, but I also thought that would work. And I bet we've got something we've developed that does exactly that.
Yeah. In Star Trek, when they talk about the cloaking device,
Right.
I kind of got that because you know how if you look at something that's red, you're seeing that because that object is absorbing all colors but red, and the red is being reflected out, right?
Right.
So I'm like, yeah, if you could get a handle on that, right? Just like
Yes.
how, a rainbow. If you see a rainbow in the sky and you say, hey, Daryl, look at that rainbow, right? There's not a rainbow there in the sense that here's an object, we can all turn our heads and look at it at the same time. What there are is trillions of water molecules that are being hit by light. And then we see them, and then the rods and cones at the back here translate them into a rainbow. But the rainbow is not there,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm sure someone's on the case. Like,
Yeah. I mean, so that kind of stuff, that's the kind of stuff that fascinates me. Like I wrote a story. One of these days I may publish it. So I was doing a lot of this research about, again, this is like 20, probably 15 years ago at least. Yeah, probably 15 years ago. About how the Chinese were doing all these experiments with they're not supposed to, but human genetic engineering, right? And like America doesn't, because there's some, I mean, theoretically, we don't, because it's ethically, it's wrong.
right,
The Chinese don't give a crap. They have no Judeo-Christian ethic.
Yep.
So they're way ahead of us in that technology of human genetic manipulation. So I wrote a story about basically humans that the Chinese government had manipulated, and they had messed with the DNA and the genes and stuff. So they were trying to basically create a super soldier. Of course, they're in the stages of where like they haven't dialed it in yet. So a lot of these guys end up going insane and leaving the program. Then they have to send people after them to kill them because they don't want anyone to know that they created these freaks, right? But one of the things they were doing was playing with, again, talking about vision and light. So our human eye can only, there's a range of light that's this big, but we can only see this much with our eye because our eye can only pick out visible light spectrum. But there's this long range of like gamma rays, infrared, ultraviolet, right? In this direction, and the same in the other direction, right? So there's a much bigger spectrum of light. It's out there, but our brains can't detect it because our instrument, the eye, has a narrow band. So if they were going to mess with it, they would play with it to the point where they would be able to widen that. So I have a character who basically he's genetically engineered, and he has a wider spectrum now. He can see from infrared to ultraviolet light. But the problem with that is he's effectively blind, because that range includes X-rays, which means he can't see solid objects. He sees through them. So he's effectively blind. He's got to wear glasses and a cane, or he'll bump into the wall because he can't see the wall. But he can see a whole bunch of crap the rest of us can't see, right? I just thought how interesting that would be to have a character like that who can see things no one else can see, but yet at the same time, he's effectively, in some ways, behaving as if he's blind because he can't see solid objects.
awesome.
And in my story, he doesn't want to be an assassin. He wants to be a dentist. Oh, and then he decides, because he can see everybody's cavities in their head, because he sees their skeletons, right? But then later on, he decides he wants to be a painter, because in some ways he can see all these beautiful things that no one else can see. And yet again, he can't really be a painter because he can't reproduce with paint what he sees because no one else can see what he sees.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah. I'm going to write that one. I mean, I've already actually plotted it out. One of these days, I'm going to get back to writing my sci-fi stories.
Yeah, there's a cartoonist who does graphic novels, and his name is like Matt Kind. It's spelled like Kindt, and he's active right now.
Yeah,
And he has a series of graphic novels called Mind Management.
Oh, yes, I have. Yeah, I've read that.
Right, and it's funny. I did a writer's workshop last year where there's this kid there, and he wanted to write science fiction, and I said to him, "Dude, you should know about Matt Kind because the way to attack it nowadays is more obliquely like that, like about the whole thing about wanting to be a dentist. Like that's actually kind of cool, right? It's funny. Do you know David Cronenberg has a movie called Scanners?
Oh, yeah.
It's actually kind of linked to this classic J.G. Ballard short story called The ComSat Angels. So J.G. Ballard has a story called The ComSat Angels, which is for like communication satellite, obviously, right? So this is a real deal. I remember when I was a kid, they would have these TV shows like That's Incredible or something.
Right.
Have this like 5-year-old kid come out who could calculate pi to like 100 decimal places and do all these amazing things.
Right.
So they're bringing all these child prodigies.
Yep.
And this was a big thing in the 70s. They'd hear the child prodigy and say, wow, he's only 5 and he's got a PhD from Harvard. Man, 20 years from now, he's going to do something awesome, right? And they were everywhere,
But they didn't. Yeah.
right? And they didn't, right? So J.G. Ballard has a short story called The Comstock Angels about a journalist who wants to track down the child prodigies and find out what happened. And he ends up finding that he finds 12 of them and finds that these 12 have a leader. And that the child prodigies are now getting organized with their Messiah and the 12, and they're going to take over.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah.
Because they're smarter than us and they can do things the average person can't do.
Yeah, so basically what happens in the movie Scanners, there's a mad scientist who invents a drug called ephemeral, where the idea is that if you give it to a pregnant woman, the baby will be born telepathic.
Right.
So he gives it to his 2 twin sons. But then when this one kid comes out, he's telepathic, but he can't turn it off.
Right.
So when he goes to a crowd, he's just crushed by hearing all these voices, so he can't process anything. And then his twin brother gets his act together a bit more to the point where he's able to become a supervillain. And then the other brother has to get his act together to stop this army of like 50 telepaths from taking over the planet.
Right. Yeah, that was a cool movie. I remember that.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah. Oh, very cool stuff. Man, I love you, Daryl. This is fun. We should do it again sometime.
Sure.
I will let you go, but I'm happy to talk to you about science fiction or writing or anything or poetry anytime.
And also, I think I would like to do a reading in El Paso sometime.
Yeah, do it.
Okay.
When this whole, pandemic thing is over.
I'm thinking maybe the fall or something. I don't know.
Yeah, hopefully. I'm hoping by then it's all mostly over.
I'm hoping too. I'm pretty sure it will be, but yeah, I can't imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great.
All right, man. God bless
Thank
you.
you. Bye.
Good night.
Yeah.